Exchange at 25 Broad, sponsor of this webcast, invites you to visit our remastered model residences. In 2004, the Domino sugar refinery in Williamsburg, Brooklyn shut its doors. Since then, the complex, consisting of 5 blocks of buildings, including the main refinery, have been purchased by CPC Resources, who intends to turn the old sugar refinery into a complex of high and low-rise apartments, a large waterfront park, and in the process, preserve some of the old structures. The Real Deal toured the old complex with representatives of CBC Resources and Raphael Vignoli Architects to learn more.
CPCR's mission, like its parents, the Community Preservation Corporation, is to develop affordable housing, and that was our primary goal in purchasing the site.
We've been working for the last almost 3 years now on developing the plans of the site. It's been pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And from the start, we really did have the goal of creating as much open space as possible, and yet to maximize the development and also to relate back to the community. Basically, the refinery building, which is the piece that we're preserving, is right in the center of the 5 blocks, in the centermost block. And so our goal is to take the remaining 4 blocks and develop them into individual parcels with lower buildings rising to higher buildings. And the design that we've come up with is breaks down the massing of them, but takes advantage of the great views that we have with the towers towards the waterfront side, and then creates a series of modules that are extruded to various heights so that we can start to take from the towers and reduce and mitigate the height as it approaches the community and along Kent Avenue.
Between 3rd and 4th, and on the waterfront site, in the low-rise buildings and in the towers, we hope to provide about 100,000 square feet of retail and 100,000 square feet of community facility space, and the balance will be residential. And we have set a goal for ourselves of achieving 30% of the units as affordable housing. And there will be additional parkland in various locations, some pocket parks, and one very large open space behind where this brick building is now, toward the river. It'll be a space about the size of the green lawn at Bryant Park. At all of the street locations, South 5th, South 4th, South 3rd, South 2nd, South 1st, the street access will be open to the public. Currently, in most locations, it's closed. In fact, the whole waterfront is closed off at this point.
So that we're trying to be sensitive to the massing of the community and also take advantage of the great opportunity that the site offers. We've been working very closely with city planning, who recently went through the rezoning of Greenpoint Williamsburg. We've basically been following those guidelines in terms of height.
CPC's first very large project, and it was an incredibly large project to undertake, was the 12,271 unit development in Parkchester, which was actually 2 condominiums that had been built by MetLife and had been converted to condominium ownership by Harry Helmsley.
A key thing as we're going forward in the design of the project is to make sure that in addition to just designing on a great site with a great view, you also have to account on this site in particular for the fact that we have this tremendous historic resource, which is the refinery building in the center. And so our objective is not to design buildings which could be anywhere in the world, but yet also design buildings that are very modern and do take advantage of the views that we have. So as we're evolving this, it'll be a mixture of something which pays respect to the refinery building, but also is something that is very contemporary and is forward-looking. And so it'll be a mixture of masonry and also glass and metal.
Early last week, the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission voted unanimously to grant landmark status to the sugar refinery, the cluster of 3 brick buildings completed in 1884. That designation will create design challenges for CPC Resources and Vignoli Architects, who had already decided before the vote to preserve the old structures, but were not previously bound by the guidelines set forth by the Commission.
The building that's going to stay is actually a complex of 3 buildings, and what you can see up there is the chimney looming above it. That's the refinery building. It's the finishing house, the pan house, and the filter house where most of the sugar processing went on. And we will be preserving the chimney and all the buildings you see in the front of it fronting on Kent.
However, the rest of the complex of buildings, which were built much later and consist of various structures, will not be preserved.
The rest of the complex will become new construction and a lot of parkland. The entire space over here in front of the refinery is going to be public open space, a green space facing on the water, with sitting areas and some
So that whole building right there that we're looking
will
at,
be preserved.
and those will be apartments.
Those will be apartments, right. There will be community facility space in the building on 3 of the lower floors, but the upper floors will be all residential.
Actually, we have another architecture firm working on the facade restoration, that's Buyer Blender Bell, and we're actually talking about doing some very interesting things inside the smokestack.
My understanding is that barges would pull up alongside of the platform here. They'd use these cranes to offload the raw sugar into this building here, which is really a long warehouse, which is where they'd store the raw sugar.
And then there were conveyor belts that took it from the raw sugar warehouse into one of the refinery buildings and handled the processing there. At a certain point, though, they stopped bringing in raw sugar and they brought in something called sugar syrup, I think.
We're going to retain the difference in height, and you can see a lot of the sort of facade has been cut and filled in with new brick, where basically as Domino was evolving and new technologies came in, they would rip out pieces of the wall and bring in new pieces of equipment through the wall and then patch it up. I mean, at the end of the day, what's interesting about the building is that it has changed a lot over the many years, and the building has adapted to accommodate that change. And so as we're moving forward, we're interested in understanding that now we're taking a historical artifact and we're changing it again, and we're going to sort of preserve what's there, but also hopefully alter it and make it usable for the people who will be living there and the community facilities.
This project will cost over $1 billion. We don't have firm numbers yet, but it's a very, very significant development, and it will take 6 to 8 years to complete.
But some community groups that have been working to preserve the old sugar refinery since it closed do not think CPC Resources' plan is necessarily the best.
Well, we'd like to see a fair number of those buildings preserved because it was the world's largest sugar refinery. It's the last one left in New York City, which once made a lot of sugar.
Okay, so you saw CPC's plans for redesigning the sugar refinery. What did you think of those plans?
Well, I was pleased with what I heard about what they've tried to do in meeting the needs of various groups in the community. They have a little bit of historic preservation. We'd like to see more. They have open space. They have affordable housing. I think they've really listened to the community. However, we are concerned that only 3 buildings are being talked about to be preserved. And also the height of the buildings that they're planning to put on the site will really dwarf what was once a really monumental refinery.
Do you think that that's acceptable to your group?
We'd prefer something better. The State Historic Preservation Office has actually determined that all the buildings on the site are eligible for the National Register of Historic Places. And even if the Landmarks Preservation Commission did not feel that the 1950s and 60s era buildings were able to be landmarked, there's still some 19th century buildings that are not included in their considerations right now. We'd at least like to have them look harder at that. But what I'd like to see, I think, is a multi-use development that kept more of the buildings and fitted the use to the particular buildings. I would actually like to see some sort of display of some pieces of the equipment to help tell the story too.
And do you think that the owners have been receptive to some of those ideas, or do you think it's a fait accompli now?
It's hard for me to say. We did have a meeting with them at one point, and I have spoken to them on the phone in the past. I think, like with a lot of groups in the community, they've done a lot of listening without saying a lot about what they would do. So I don't have a good sense of what alternatives they might really consider. We've at least tried to convince them to let us in and do a documentation where we would take photos and make architectural drawings of what is there before it's gone.
And will they do that?
They say it's a nice idea and they'll get back to us, so we don't know.
Thanks for joining us for this special segment of the Real Deal webcast. Please join us next week for our regular Real Deal news and interviews.